Will you drink to the earth and to the days which have passed upon it? Will you drink to the fullness which was and to friends who have passed on? Will you drink to good company well met?
Has there been any estimates, or do you have any general idea of how many people were denied access to your story because of the government censorship?
So there are polls about that. The MRC, Media Research Center, did a poll about, it said 45% of Biden voters were not aware of the story. But I think it also is an impossible question to answer, because the thing about the censorship was not only that it was, deleted or whatever from Twitter, but also it casted an aspersion on the reporting, on me, that was literally made up. It was made up. And there is a subset of this country where, despite the New York Times, the Washington Post, like literally fill in the blank, like liberal news legacy outlet that they all trust, they just reflexively think laptop from hell, fake, Russia, whatever. And so the effect of that can't be measured, because these people who are spies, who the country looks at as the ultimate authority of truth, came out and said that this was, there was something wrong with it, so you can't measure the impact of that.
And so going back to the legacy media, the Oversight Committee had a very explosive hearing yesterday with whistleblowers from the IRS. Some of our legacy media outlets did not cover the hearing, but they did talk about Taco Tuesday, and they talked about other things that seem to be of great interest to them, but not the fact that we are uncovering an enormous amount of corruption at the very highest levels in our government. While you didn't know about the FBI's efforts at the time, I would assume that between the Twitter files and what we've uncovered in the Missouri versus Biden case, you now know the role that the FBI played in censoring your work. Do you think the FBI tried to ensure that the American people didn't hear the story in order to change the outcome of the election in 2020?
I don't know how to answer that question, because I'm not in their head. I don't know, the reason why. I don't have a head count of how many Biden voters work at the FBI. I can't assign a motive to them. I can just tell you what happened and what we've learned in the 2 years since this blatant, in-your-face censorship event.
But we do know that the American public were not told the truth about the Hunter Biden laptop and Joe Biden's involvement with his dealings, foreign dealings.
Well, that's it, and that's what pertains to my work and my experience.
Thank you.
The pillars of our constitutional republic, not democracy, are being taken down bit by bit because the press is being told they can't ask the tough questions. Ms. Morris, you have probably received threats, you have been censored, you have been silenced. Mr. Sauer, you have been before us many times, and you have expressed the pushback, the threats that you have received. Mr. Kennedy, I can't imagine what you receive on a daily basis from both the left and the right. So I'm going to go to our Democratic colleague, Mr. Lynch, and ask the question, what impact does the continued narrative of weaponization have on the general public? I know he framed this in a way to make a point that it is somehow negative to ask the tough questions, but I'm going to ask our three witnesses here. What are the ramifications if we don't talk about it, if we don't expose it? And I only have 25 seconds, so Mr. Sauer, take it away.
If federal censorship is not stood up to aggressively, it will expand to every corner of online discourse.
Ms. Morris.
It's just this, I can't even believe this is a conversation. Like, this is not controversial or taboo. We live in the United States of America, and you have the right to say whatever you want, to print whatever you want, and to read whatever you want.
Mr. Kennedy.
A government that can censor its critics has license for every atrocity. It is the beginning of totalitarianism. There's never been a time in history when we look back and the guys who were censoring people were the good guys. All of us grew up reading Arthur Koestler, Robert Heinlein, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, and they were all saying the same thing. Once you start censoring, you're on your way to dystopia and totalitarianism.
Now, did you do a forensic examination of that hard drive before you printed your story?
We had tech people in the Post looking at it, yes.
That's a
I don't-
forensic analysis?
No, not.
I
what
highly
does that
doubt the New York Post has the ability to do a forensic analysis of a hard drive. Ms. Morris, were you the primary drafter of this article?
Yes.
Bruce Golding was not the primary author?
No.
Drafter?
No.
Did he help with the article?
Yes.
And then isn't it true that he decided to withdraw his name from the byline because of concerns that he had?
I wasn't involved with that.
Well, isn't it true, whether you were involved in it or not?
I don't know the details.
But he did withdraw his name from the byline.
His name was not published.
Right. Well, I'd like to introduce for the record an article in the New York Times that says, the first line is, New York Post front page article about Hunter Biden was written mostly by a staff reporter who refused to put his name on it, two Post employees said. Now, I would note, you also said that this article was determinative of the election, but there was a pause for 24 hours, and there was a tremendous controversy. And there is no doubt that this article received far more attention because of the controversy than it would if it had ever been published without any controversy. And it is odd to hear my colleagues and Ms. Morris talk about their somehow expert knowledge about whether it affected the election, because we're not hearing a lot about Jim Comey, although one of my colleagues did say that he interfered in the 2016 election, and that is correct. He interfered on behalf of Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton by unnecessarily announcing an investigation 6 days before. The majority would like us to believe that there's some broad government conspiracy, but in reality, this government is playing by the book. That is why Joe Biden's Justice Department has allowed a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney to continue his investigation of the president's son, which is in direct contrast to what the former president did by weaponizing the Justice Department. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes himself. Hard evidence. Mr. Johnson said that we're not only witnesses to censorship, we were victims. The Republican website on the House Judiciary Committee posted this story, and it was limited where it could go. You got to. They exercise censorship of the House Judiciary Republican account, for goodness sake. Ms. Wiley, you were a lawyer for the ACLU?
I was.
Mr. Kennedy, I remember when the ACLU defended they were the champions of the First Amendment. You remember that? You remember that, ACLU?
I remember when the ACLU represented Nazis who they were appalled by.
Appalled, disgusted by, and yet they would defend the crazy things they said, right? That's how much the First Amendment meant to them, right?
Exactly.
I want to go back to where Mr. Stubbe was. I want to talk about this hard evidence that Mr. Goldman says doesn't exist. I want to read from the facts. This is what the White House was saying. I want to go to just 3 statements. One, cannot stress this is statements from the Biden White House to social media, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. Please remove this account immediately. Same kind of thing they put on yours, remove ASAP. But here's the better one. Here's the better one. Mr. Flaherty, who ran this COVID operation misinformation concept at the White House, Mr. Flaherty said this, not to sound like a broken record, how much content is being demoted and how effective are you at mitigating reach and how quickly? And we should just translate that because this is real simple. How much censorship are you doing How much censorship are you doing and how quickly are you doing it? But I think the kicker is what Jen Psaki, the press secretary, said back in 2021. Look at this. Now think about this. The press secretary, I mean, we're talking about the White House, considered the center of freedom on the planet. The press secretary in the press room says this: we are in regular touch with these social media platforms, and those engagements typically happen through members of our senior staff, but also members of our COVID-19 team. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation, their definition, of course. Psaki also stated one of the White House asks was of social media companies to create a robust enforcement strategy. So you got the press secretary in the press room in the White House saying we're going to limit the press.